Welcome back, everybody. And we're going to have a really great show for you today. It's going to be really a neat show. And we're going to talk about some Speedway history, some early day Speedway history. That's right. We're going to talk about that. And if you want to go ahead and subscribe to the Speedway channel, you won't miss a thing. We have actually some really great guests coming on the show pretty soon. So if you want to ring that notification bell, you'll be notified when we have the next Speedway show. And today we're talked about the beginnings actually of Speedway. Last show we talked about the early days Speedway, and it was really cool. And today we're going to go ahead and talk about a little bit the modern day revival of Speedway. But first, we talked about Shrimp Burns on the last show. And Shrimp, we found a video of Shrimp, and we're going to go ahead. This guy was good. This was actually before Sprouts Elder. Shrimp was around, and he was really a good rider, Shrimp. And we're going to go ahead and see exactly how good of a rider Shrimp was. We kind of underestimated. I was making fun of his smell, but actually he was probably a shrimpy guy, so they called him Shrimp. So we're going to go ahead and check him out. There's Shrimp Burns. Remember, we talked about him. This was one of those wood track race that we talked about in the 1910s and 1920s in one of our last shows. And Shrimp Burns is a good rider. He went ahead and won that race. But these were the tracks. They made it out of wood, and they wrought it with the termites. It only lasted like 10 years. It cost $100,000 to build these particular racetracks. And Shrimp getting the win. Yeah, Shrimp. Congratulations, Shrimp. That guy was an awesome rider. There he is. There's a little Shrimpy. I guess he was small. Yeah, he was small. He was a shrimp. He was a mini rider. But the small guys are always good riders. And Shrimp, actually, he was a fast guy. I think he was like going over 100 miles an hour, like 102 miles an hour on that wood track. Like I mentioned, the termites would eat that wood, and then there would be no more wood. So those $100,000 racetracks made out of wood and dirt and water created the termites, and there was no more racetrack after a few years. But Shrimp was really fast. He set the record. He set this speed record. This guy Shrimp was really fast. He was actually going 102 miles per hour. There it is, 102 miles an hour, Shrimp Burns. And he crossed the finish line on the Indian motorcycle before the JP World's Record falls. This guy was fast. There's Shrimpy right there on an Indian motorcycle. Shrimp Burns. Look at that bike. It's amazing. Well, that guy was good. He actually raced over 102 miles an hour. I mean, this guy set a world speed record on a racetrack at 102 miles an hour. Shrimp was an amazing rider. This guy was good. We kind of teased him a little bit, but Shrimp was an amazing rider. So that's kind of a little history. We had this guy, Shrimp Burns, and he was fast. That was a race in Los Angeles, California in 1921. That was April 23rd. Was it 23rd? Let's see, what day was that? That was in April 23rd, 1921 in Los Angeles, California. So today we're going to talk Speedway and more modern day Speedway than Shrimp we used to race. And today we're going to talk about the revival of Speedway. But we can't talk about the revival of Speedway unless we go ahead and talk about this guy. This is Ernie Rocio. Ernie Rocio was a very great Speedway rider in the early 50s. He raced on the Sheffield Tigers in the British League. And he was an American rider who raced in Los Angeles, California. He was a local rider in California. And he was really good. And he became the team captain of the American Speedway team in 1951, and he just kept getting better and better. Like we had the rider Renton Todd on the show a couple of days ago, and Ernie Rocio just kept getting better. And the young riders today, all of them can continue to progress. like Ernie Rocio progressed, he wasn't really a name. And Jerry Fairchild, he actually saw Ernie and he said, you know, this guy has potential. He doesn't have a lot of money, but the guy looked like a great rider. And that's exactly what Jerry did to me. He went ahead and picked me up like he did Ernie. And he just said, this guy doesn't have a lot of money, but this guy looks like he has a little talent and he's riding that JAP and we're going to sponsor him. So Jerry Fairchild went ahead and sponsored Ernie. There's Jerry. Jerry's that guy with the dark hair, and he's talking to Ernie Rocio, a young Ernie Rocio, and he's talking to him, preparing his race bike. He did a lot of like track records for speed and stuff. And Fairchild was actually behind Ernie, and he went ahead and built the first lay-down speedway bike in about the mid-40s or so. And so that's Ernie before he passed away in 1952. And Ernie went ahead and he died in West Ham Speedway in England in 52. And it was really tragic. And he just went ahead and had a very terrible crash. And, you know, it was just a real tragic day. And Speedway kind of like died down, you know, about that time. There was not that much American Speedway. So after Ernie's death in 52, his brother Johnny and a few other guys stopped riding, and Speedway kind of simmered down in American history. There wasn't that much Speedway going on. And so that's kind of what happened at that time. And then actually, there was some Speedway like going on, like El Toro Raceway. Trojan had a little bit of Speedway later on. There was like demo racing. I was talking to Bruce Hazerat, and he was kind of telling me that the Speedway wasn't really organized. It was like practice, and then they just kind of went riding a little bit, and it was just kind of, it wasn't really organized. It was just kind of like Speedway guys going out there, and Sonny Nutter was out there riding, trying a Speedway bike. He actually was one of the first riders there in the modern era to start riding. Sonny had a little jump on everyone. And the Rocket Rick Woods was, you know, he was an early day revival guy, and he was getting a lot of practice on that Speedway bike. So Rick Woods and Sonny Nutter were some of the early day riders. But so anyways, they went ahead and they had the first organized Speedway race. There it is at the Whiteman Stadium as opening April 12th. 1968, and that was Speedway. There's Sammy Tanner, it looks like, on the cover. The amazing Sammy Tanner. That guy, he won a lot. He won like over 400 races at the Ascot Park. Sammy Tanner is a legend and amazing, and he was on the cover of the early day Speedway at Whiteman Stadium. It was a D-shaped particular racetrack, and it was really kind of cool. The straightaway had like the fans were sitting in the straightaway, and then the turns were a little banked, and they had walls around it. It was pretty cool. And it was actually located at the Whiteman Airport. It's a little like private airport or something. And they had a circle, like a concrete track. And then inside the concrete track, they had the Speedway track. And the fans were sitting kind of far back on the straightaway. And the straightaway was like the straight line, and then the D shape was around the track where they had the curves, the turns 1 and 2, 3 and 4. And the pits were around gate 4. The turn 4 was where the pits were. So that was pretty cool. But, you know, they didn't know where to get the riders. They wanted to do the Speedway race, but they didn't have like the Speedway riders. So they're thinking like, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do? So they went ahead and thought like Speedway is kind of a little bit like flat track. So they went ahead and start promoting and getting riders like Wild Bill Cody. Do you know Wild Bill Cody? He is an amazing rider. He was a flat tracker before he became a Speedway rider. And he went ahead and rode the Sacramento Mile with Mert Lawwell. And Cody was just a fast rider on the long track. They got riders. Also, Sonny Nutter was a real fast rider. And they had most of these riders came from long tracks. But Bill Cody, we just going to show some pictures of Bill Cody. He was an amazing long track rider. Cody, he was riding, like I say, the flat trackers, and he was really fast. Wild Bill was really fast. He was a good rider. And so they recruited riders like him and others. He wasn't the only guy, but we just have pictures of Bill today. And actually, Bill Cody, when he was younger, about this time, they recruited him for Speedway. And after he went over to Australia, he was blowing away all the champions like Ivan Major, Barry Briggs. And, you know, Cody was good. I mean, this guy was fast. He was like ranked in the top couple in the mile, and he was just a fast rider. Wild Bill was an amazing long track, and he was fast as lightning. This guy had courage. Wild Bill really opened that throttle, and he never let that thing go. So we had Bill Cody being recruited there, and he was just a really good flat tracker, and he was racing with all the flat trackers. Bill was a national like ranked rider in the top 5 or something. He was fast. Bill Cody was an amazing flat tracker. He's more better than what we really talk about. We don't really think of Bill Cody as a flat tracker, but Bill Cody was an amazing flat tracker. That guy was so good. He was fast as lightning, and he could ride that long track and the short track pretty good. He was the top point getter at the Costa Mesa Speedway for like the first 5 or 6 or 7 years. He made a lot of money. While Bill Cody was an amazing rider, and he made a lot of money. He was a businessman, and he started that Jawa distributorship in Garden Grove, California. And so anyways, getting back to the Speedway, let's get back to the Whiteman Speedway. It went ahead and they start riding here in like 1968, and there's a picture of the Rocket, Rick Woods. He's riding that JAP Speedway bike, and Sammy Tanner's close behind Rick Woods. And Jerry Fairchild, he went ahead and brought the first Speedway bikes to the Whiteman Stadium. Here's Jerry. Jerry was my mechanic. I actually took this video of Jerry. This is a clip from a real life video that I took of Fairchild. And he didn't like his picture taken, so I did a video of Jerry, and I took this clip from the video. It's kind of a funny picture, but Jerry was a mastermind. Inside that head was a very amazing person. And Fairchild, he went ahead and brought like a whole truckload full of JAP Speedway bikes to the Whiteman Stadium and dropped them off. They were old bikes, like from the 1930s or something. I saw those bikes. They were old. And he dropped them off for the Speedway riders at the Whiteman Stadium. And he told those Speedway riders and dude Criswall, go ahead, use my Speedway bikes. I want you guys to race Speedway. And so Fairchild dropped off a whole stack full of these old JP Speedway bikes for those riders to ride. And they went ahead and rode those things, and they were pretty good. So, and then they started winning. They had like different kinds of races. Here's a they used to have these like flash races or something where they would like have like maybe like a match race, and then they had the trophy girl, I guess. And this is one of the riders, Jim Nicholson, winning the trophy. He won the trophy dash. I think they call it the trophy dash. And I don't know exactly what the trophy dash was, but Jim Nicholson. Actually, Jack Nicholson, isn't he a movie actor? And that's Jim Nicholson, maybe Jack's younger brother or something. But anyways, they went ahead and did that. We don't know about Jim Nicholson that much, but he was a good rider and won that trophy dash. And so they went ahead and they had these Speedway races. And here's one of the programs, early day programs at the Whiteman Stadium. Dude Criswall, here, I'll get over here so you can see me. Dude Criswall, he was kind of a thrifty guy. Some people say like dude was a little bit of a shyster type of guy, but he brought the Speedway back, so we don't care, right? We don't care. And he went ahead, if you look here, where is it? Right here. If you look right where my finger is, he was charging like 50 cents for a program. So that was a little expensive back in the 1968. So when Harry Oxley and Jack Milne started the Costa Mesa Speedway in 69, only 1 year later, they went ahead for the 50 years or more giving the programs away for free. But dude Criswall over here, wherever he is, he went ahead and charged 50 cents for the program. And I'm sure that was pretty expensive. You go to a speedway race and you have to pay 50 cents for the program. I thought that was kind of funny myself. So there they are sliding in the Whiteman Stadium. All they knew how to ride was the TT style. You sit down, you put your leg out, and you ride that speedway bike. It's a style of the TT. Oh, look at that. There's a TT rider right there. Just putting that leg out, sitting down on that. It looks like a TT bike. So these guys in the early days, they actually didn't know how to really ride a speedway bike. They just rode like TT style. That was their style. And here's another guy. That was Scott. He was actually, Steve Scott was one of the top point getters was this guy, Steve Scott. He was bad, dude. And he rode hard, and he was actually leading the points at the Whiteman Stadium in the early parts of the season. This guy was good. He was hot. We never really hear of this guy. And the points, he was actually at the top of the points. So it was pretty good. And we saw him already. And then here's another picture right here of Rick Woods. Do you know the Rocket Rick Woods? Rick Woods was an amazing rider. He actually, look at him. He's doing the TT style, sitting down, putting that leg up. And he's just riding the way that the TT riders knew how to ride. They didn't really know how to ride speedway the proper way at that time, especially at the beginning of the Whiteman Stadium. They just didn't know, exactly how to really ride speedway. That was just the way that they rode it. And so that was kind of the way that they did it. And the speedway, they start just riding every week. And here's Rick Woods and Swede Savage. I think Swede was an IndyCar rider. I think he was. And there's Rick Woods. He looks like he's wearing the number 1 on the outside. You don't see Woods riding the outside very often. But Rick Woods, I guess he's number 11. They had this team racing. And that looks like from the team racing, actually. They had teams that were racing. And they just went ahead and raced. They had the Red Devils and the Tigers. They had 2 different speedway teams. And actually, this looks like their race bibs from when they raced the teams. And let's see, they went ahead and had 2 different teams in 1968. They actually copied the British League and the teams. They had the Red Devils, which was the other team, the team that looks like Swede is riding for. And that is Sonny Nutter, Bruce Hazeroth, and Steve Bass was riding on the Red Devils. They were Red Devils. And the Tigers, which is what Rick Woods is riding for. He's on the outside there. He was riding on the Tiger team. That was with Stu Morley, Steve Scott, and Johnny Carter. And that was really cool. These guys were fast and they were good. And they were pretty much riding like sit down style. They would have those bars lowered like the old days. They would sit down, they would put their feet on the ground, and they would just ride that speedway bike sitting down. That's kind of the only way that they pretty much knew how to ride it. And they were racing a lot, riding that style. And there was a rider that was on the show that we're going to go ahead and find here. This guy here is Greg Hazeroth. It's Bruce Hazeroth's brother. Do you know Greg Hazeroth? Greg was on our show the other day, and this is Greg when he was handsome in his younger days. No, he's handsome now. I'm just joking. We love Greg Hazeroth. And Greg was telling us a story when he was on the show. He was an early day pioneer of Speedway with his brother, Bruce. Bruce was his half brother, and he was a little bit older. And actually, Bruce was on one of the teams. He was a Speedway rider, and he was on the Red Devils. Bruce Hazelrod was a Red Devil, and Greg was a little young, and he wasn't actually riding on the team at that time. But it was really cool. And Greg was telling me the story of how they used to race in the Whiteman Stadium, which I would never have known reading a book or anything. And he was telling me that when they first started the races, they didn't have like a proper pit steward. Like we have Ryan Evans, where you pick the balls out of the hat, and you get to pick where you get to start in your gates. Back at Whiteman Stadium, they didn't have any of that. They didn't have really a proper pit steward. So what they did at the Whiteman Stadium in 1968, they went ahead and they bumped you off to start the race like normal. And then you'd have to race to the starting line, and you'd have to pick your gate, whether you're gate 1, 2, or 3, or 4. Probably the last guy on the line, he gets gate 4, right? And the first guy gets gate 1, probably. So Greg went ahead and he said, I want to get like the pole position. I want number 1. So they bumped Greg off to start his Speedway bike, and Greg raced to the gate number 1, the pole position on 1. So Greg's waiting there, he's got his Speedway bike and he's waiting, and so all of a sudden, he hears this noise, like the Speedway bike, and it's on the infield. And so Greg turns around and he looks over, and there's Sliding Sonny Nutter on the infield. He's before the pole position, and he's yelling at Greg like, "Hey, Greg, move over! That's my spot. You got to move over." So Sonny Nutter was like telling Greg like, "You're in my spot, move over. I am Sonny Nutter, and I am like a top rider here, and you are a kid, so you must move over to the lower spot." So actually, Greg had to move over because Sonny told him, and he moved over to like gate 1.5, and then Sliding Sonny Nutter slid into gate 1. So that's kind of the way it worked in the old days. They just said like, you get there and you fight for your position, and whoever wins. Greg was a young rider, so I think he didn't want to like fight with Sliding Sonny. But Greg was telling me that he got revenge on Sonny Nutter because one time that he went ahead and Greg, I guess he crashed Sonny Nutter. Greg was kind of a wild, crazy rider. He was fast, but he was a little edgy at times, And so he actually rode into Sonny Nutter, and he took Sonny Nutter's leg out, I guess, and then he caused like a lot of stitches in Sonny Nutter's leg. And to this day, Sliding Sonny Nutter has never forgave Greg Hazelrod for that injury. So every time Sonny Nutter sees Greg Hazelrod, he says, "Hey, do you remember those stitches, those 6 stitches you put on my leg?" So that was pretty funny. So that's how they did it back in the old days of the Whiteman Stadium. They had to fight for that pole position or number 2. So it was the first come, first serve. Forget the balls, forget the hat, forget all that. We're going to fight for those pole positions. So that was pretty fun how they did that. And then about that time, there was a rider. I don't know if you've heard of his name. His name is like Mike Bass. And then there's a guy, maybe his name is Steve Bass. I'm not sure if you've heard of his name or not. They're kind of like, I don't know, they're guys that weren't really known that well. And they were young boys, and they actually saw, they were a little younger here, but they saw like a sign that said Whiteman Stadium. There's Speedway races. There's a young Steve on the left giving that devilish grin, and Mike in the white t-shirt, good old Mike, serious Mike. And these guys were really good. They rode like minis and flat track. And these guys were preparing to be Speedway stars. And they saw like a banner, because they actually lived only 15 minutes from the Whiteman Stadium at the time, Mike and Steve Bass. And these guys actually saw this banner that was put up, this one of Sammy Tanner, and they said, like, to their family, like, let's go to the Speedway races. It looks like fun. It's only like 10 minutes away from our house. So they went ahead and went to the Speedway races. And when they saw the Speedway, they really got hooked. And then they said to their Uncle Harlan, like, let's get a Speedway bike. And I think Uncle Harlan was riding it Whiteman Stadium, from what I know, and their parents went ahead and bought them a Speedway bike. Actually, here's Mike Bass. He was a young rider at the time, and he had a JAP that he and Steve shared. They actually shared a JAP. So Mike would go out and ride, and then he was younger. Mike was a couple years younger than Steve. Steve was a little older, and he had a little maturity on Mike, because Mike was like, I don't know, he was like 14, 15 years old, maybe 16. And Steve was like, 17 or 18 or something at the time. So they would share that JAP. So Mike would race, and then they would come back in, and then they would fill up the fuel of the JAP, the methanol, and then Steve would go out and race, and then Mike would race, and they'd fill that up. So that was pretty cool. And you had these guys. Here's a clipping from the thing. If you look down at the bottom, the main event, you see in 5th place, you see Mike Bass on a JAP. And 8 ESOs that started to come in, and they started riding ESOs. And there's the clippings from the Tigers and the Red Devils. So you can actually see, like, the clippings here of the different Speedway teams. We talk about, like, they had the Speedway teams. And the top section is actually the standings of the thing, of the league. They had just 2 teams, the Red Devils and the Tigers. And then at the bottom was for, like, the newer riders, like Mike Bass. He was a newer rider, and that was a main event. So they kind of like took divisions of the riders. The new riders were on the teams. Actually, new riders were not on the teams, and the old riders like Sonny Nutter and Rick Woods, the established Speedway riders, they got on a Speedway team. And Steve Bass actually, he actually was good, when he first started. They were both good. Mike was a little behind. He had to kind of progress, like all of us. It's okay, Mike, we know where you ended up, and it was kind of high. But at the beginning, we have to keep, developing ourselves. Like I told Renton Todd the other day, it's not an instant thing. It's a line upon line, precept upon precept. Becoming a Speedway star is not a get-rich-quick system. It's not fast. It takes time. And we can see Mike Bass getting 5th in the main. We know where he was at in a couple of years, the United States champion. So that's kind of how it worked in those days. And then there's the point standings. I said that there's Jack O'Brien and Steve Scott. They're at the points. That's probably at the beginning of the season. So this was the Whiteman points where they stood, and they had a track record. And if you see Bruce Hazerat, the brother of Greg, I didn't think Bruce was that good, but he was on a Speedway team, and he was number 2 with the track record. So Bruce Hazerat was really good, and he was married. His daughter he's passed away. Rest in peace, Bruce Hazerat. And his daughter is Venus, and she was actually married at one time to Buck Blair, battling Buck Blair. And actually, Venus and I would always see Bruce sitting there, and I say, "Who's this guy?" And they would say, Venus and Buck, when they were married, they said, "Oh, that's my dad, Bruce Hazerat, the Speedway star of the '68." So I got to say, "Hey, Bruce, how you doing?" And he was a good guy. We hung out a little bit at Costa Mesa during the Speedway when I was riding and stuff. We'd go sit in the stands, maybe when we lost. And we would hang out with Bruce Hazerat. And we had his brother, Greg, on the show just last week or so. And maybe we'll have Greg back again. And he has more to talk about the '68 Speedway. It's really fun talking about the '68 Speedway season, because it was really like a lot of neat stuff. And then you had, like I say, Rick Woods sitting down doing that sliding style. It was really neat, you know, how they did that. But the promoters, they went ahead and they decided that they thought that these speedway riders could do better. You know, like the speedway was, the riders were kind of like, they needed to progress. You know, like the promoter dude thought, you know, we need to do something because we have these great riders, but they're all riding like TT style. They're all sitting on their butts and they're all riding, you know, like this certain kind of style, this speedway style, and they were riding Fairchild bikes. Here's some of Jerry Fairchild's bikes, and they were riding all of the Fairchild bikes. All those old JPs are from who? From Jerry Fairchild. He just dropped off. I think Sliding Sunny Nutter is riding that Triumph. It looks like, yeah, number 19 there, Sunny Nutter. And then you have, let's see, the point leader up front. And then you have Jones and then Stu Morley. Stu Morley, I think, was a big guy. I think he was that guy in the back, if I'm not mistaken. He was a big dude. That was Stu Morley. And they're riding all the Fairchild JPs. And then they actually had more riding here. They're riding. There's Sammy Tanner. Do you know Sammy Tanner? And he was riding on front there. Sammy Tanner was a very famous flat tracker at Ascot Park. Like I said, he won over 400 races and main events over at the very dangerous Ascot Park. And he was a famous flat tracker. A lot of these riders, they say that Sammy Tanner is really one of their favorite riders ever. So Sammy Tanner was just an amazing speedway rider and more amazing flat tracker. So you have the number 199, and it looks like you have maybe Rick Woods back there. I can't tell. But we have speedway action in 1969. That was just amazing, that era of speedway. And those guys were good. Those guys were like flying. And here's a program from the Whiteman Stadium back in 1968. And we had Sliding Sunny Nutter. See, Sonny actually rode for the Triumph. You know, he rode, I guess he worked for that company, or he actually rode those bikes. I read that when he was a TT rider. So when Sonny went ahead and raced Speedway, he went ahead and was sponsored by the Triumph motorcycles, because Triumph motorcycles are very fast, and they were the TT bikes that Sonny rode when he was racing the TT. So there's Sunny Nutter on maybe one of his first program covers, Sliding Sunny Nutter. That's awesome. I mean, we got some cool stuff. We have the original program from the Whiteman Stadium in 1968. So that was really neat stuff. And then we have another program here. I don't know who this guy is. I can't read his name. He looks like I think that looks like Stu Morley, though, because Stu Morley was like this big dude, big kind of fat guy. And this guy here looks like he's kind of big and fat. So maybe that's Stu Morley. I don't know. That's pretty cool. And these are original programs from the Whiteman Stadium in 1968. So that's pretty cool. This is a piece of history here. It's neat. And here's a rider. It looks like he's trying to stand up a little bit on a speedway bike. Or actually, maybe he crossed up too much and then he's sliding out or something. But the programs were all 50 cents. Dude Criswall was capitalizing on the programs for 50 cents. So if you had 2 quarters, you could actually buy one of those programs in 1968. Dude Criswall, the master of scam. No, just joking. So let's see, what else have we got here? Here actually was the Speedway League. Steve Evans would like this one. They had the National Speedway League. And this was the first Speedway League. Like I said, they had the Red Devils, and they had the Tigers. And this was actually the name of the first Speedway League, was the Red Devils. And these are all the announcers. I don't see Terry Ike Clanton up there, so I guess that was that was before Terry's day. And we don't see the pit steward, Ryan Evans, and we don't see Harry Oxley's name up there. No, we don't see Harry. This was before their time. And they're racing, that team racing. That was pretty cool. You know, they have the team racing in England and UK, And then they went ahead and they did it in 1968. And then they brought the team racing again back in 1976. And that lasted another year. And this actually lasted a year too. But you didn't know that they had team racing in 1960. I mean, think about it. They just start the revival of Speedway, that's the modern revival. And then they do team racing. It's like, wow, they did. The Whiteman Stadium was pretty cool as far as it was on airport outside a hangar. And the only problem was the fans, they sat kind of far back, from the track. And I think it didn't provide a real rich experience for the fans. The fans were not really big at the Whiteman Stadium. And that was created kind of a problem a little bit. And here's another thing of the Whiteman Stadium. This was, let's go to the races at the Whiteman Stadium. Do you want to go racing? Yeah, I want to go racing right now. So Steve Evans, I talked to Steve today, and he said, what's the address of the Whiteman Stadium? I said, Steve, it's at the Pacoima Airport. And I don't know if it's still there. maybe there's houses there, but I think it's far in the desert. Steve likes those kind of places. And that was where the Bass brothers lived, out there in the desert. And so Steve Evans said, let's see if we can do the Pacoima racing again. So maybe that's going to be his next Speedway venue. The Pacoima races. Steve Evans, if anyone can do it, Steve Evans can do it. That guy is a master. He's shown his colors during the pandemic times of putting on Speedway races. And if you like Speedway in America, you're going to like what Steve Evans has done. He's got the Bakersfield team going on. And like I said, in 76, they used to have a team called the Bakersfield Bandits. And Steve Evans, I read just about 10 minutes ago, Steve Evans has a team called the Bakersfield Bandits from 1976 when they had team racing. And they were actually the winners of the National League Speedway League. And they actually copied the same name from the Whiteman Stadium. They were called the National League Speedway. So Steve Evans, he actually has a team called the Bakersfield Bandits from the National Speedway League in 76. And then there's a couple other teams. Let's see, one team is called the Wolverhampton Wolves or whatever. I don't know where they're from. It's the Wolves or something like that. And then there's another team that's called, let's see, that would be from Bruce Penhall's team. That was Bruce Penhall's team. And so, I was on the Aces, the Los Angeles Aces, and whatever happened to the Los Angeles Aces, I think they're gone. We're going to bring all new teams to Steve Evans Speedway League now. Forget those old teams. We had the Orange County Eagles or whatever, and the Los Angeles Aces, and they're no more. I guess that's progress, right? So we had Speedway here, and lots of people started recognizing the Speedway. It just became kind of popular, and people started to see these Speedway races, and they start, even though that the viewership wasn't that good because the fans sat kind of far away from the track, but the Speedways start taking off, and it was just, became kind of popular. And here's a blog I did on Mike Bass. In the beginning, Michael Bass, he was just an amazing rider. He just started off slow at Whiteman. And then there's his Uncle Harlan in the middle. We love Harlan Bass. I talked to somebody just a day or two ago. It was Rhett and Todd, and he sees Mike Bass every month, a couple of times. And I said to Renton, I said, does Uncle Harlan still race Speedway? And he said, oh, no, he's 90 years old. So I guess Uncle Harlan finally stopped racing. I love his goatee little beard. He has this little goat beard. And every time I used to watch Harlan, I used to think, of the goat beard he had. And there's Mike Bass, a young Mike Bass on the right side there, holding a championship trophy. Mike has always been an amazing rider. We're going to try to get Mike Bass on the show, and he said he would do it, his only interview ever. And there's a young Mike Bass on the left-hand side we're going to get Mike Bass on the show, and we're going to talk some Speedway. We love Mike Bass. I'm just a Mike Bass fan, like he's one of my favorite all-time riders in Speedway. I just have always admired. He's just like a master of Speedway. He's like a machine. He's like a computer. Mike Bass was a great starter, and he just, if Mike Bass beat you off the gate, you're not going to beat him. he just wouldn't let you win. And Mike Bass is just really like just a living legend. And we really want to talk with him. We want to talk with Mike Bass. And his wife, Dee, said, Mike Bass will give you 5 minutes. So we're excited. I'm going to probably try setting that up. I haven't really bothered him too much lately since they said that. But I made a 4-part series of Mike Bass. And this particular video is the beginning of that 4-part series. I did a 4-part series in the beginning. That's actually the cover of the particular video. It's cool. It got a lot of views. Mike Bass saw the video, all 4 views, and Mike Bass approved. I was really happy because when you're making a story about somebody like Mike Bass, you don't want them to like watch your video and say, dude, you suck, everything was wrong. And Dee told me you did your research on Mike Bass and you had that one really close. So I was happy. We did Mike Bass at the beginning, like there, and then we did like him winning his first championship races in the 70s. And then we had him as an older rider riding like in the 80s and stuff like that. He won over 4,000 Speedway races. Mike Bass was just an amazing guy. And he won 7 United States championships in the 70s. 7 out of 10 championships were won by who? Michael Bass. That is amazing. I think who was that? That was Mike Faria in the 90s. He won 3. So, you're never going to see a guy win 7 out of 10 United States championships in a decade. I don't think ever. That will last forever. Mike Bass is a legend. He's done things that nobody could ever do. And he won like 6 California state championships. And Steve Bass won a national championship and 6 California state championships with Mike Bass. So Steve won those first, I think it was. And then Mike says, I'm going to keep racing until I match my brother Steve with those 6 California state championships. And Mike Bass did that. He matched his brother's record. So that was cool. These guys are just amazing. They're legends of all legends, Mike and Steve Bass. So getting back to, and also that blog, you might want to see that. It's really cool. And then we talked, the last part of the blog, we talk about like Mike Bass as he got older. He had this like a stroke, and he had a string of bad luck with this situation, and he's doing better now. He's not able to ride a motorcycle anymore because of his injury situation, but Mike Bass is doing well, and he's doing good. We're going to hopefully have him on the show. And that actually, if we have Mike Bass on the show, I'm just being honest with you, that's going to make my whole year. 2021 will be complete. I don't care what happens. If we talk to Mike Bass, I will cherish that moment forever. So that's really cool. And then we talked about Mike Bass, his last part of his life where he had this stroke. It was like a stroke in his brain, and it really was serious. Mike was messed up, and, he's recouped. He's doing better, and he's really, doing quite well considering his, situation. So that's really good. And we always pray for the Bass family, and we love, Mike Bass, Steve Bass, rest in peace, Steve, and the whole entire Bass family. They've meant so much for Speedway. If you're into American Speedway, any bit, you're going to really respect the Bass family, and they're like the legends of Speedway. And if you disrespect the Bass family, you're really wrong, because the Bass were just the most amazing family, with their whole family supporting early day Speedway, coming out and then being legends. And Mike Bass even had a son, Ryan Bass, and he rode, I guess a couple years ago was his last year, I found out. But Renton bought his bike, Ryan's bike. I didn't know that. So I always thought Ryan was still riding, but he sold his bike to Renton. And Renton's burning the courses up, the track up these days. But getting back to the Speedway in 1968, we had this guy. Do you know who this man is? He is not a fast car salesman. It is Harry Oxley. And he actually came to the Whiteman Stadium in 1968 to watch Speedway. Harry Oxley was a spectator at Dude Criswall's track there. And Harry Oxley just actually saw how cool Speedway is, and it is pretty cool. And he actually worked for this guy. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Jack Milne. Where is Jack? Let's find Jack here. He's here somewhere. Jack Milne was the 1937 world champion Speedway rider, the first American world champion on that podium with Lammy and his brother Cordy in 37, all from Pasadena, California. All three Americans, all three Pasadena. You'll never see that one again. That's just amazing. And Jack Milne, actually, he owned a car dealership called the Milne Car Dealership or something in Pasadena, California. Jack had a motorcycle shop and he had a car dealership, a big one too. Jack was an amazing businessman, genius mind. I mean, I don't even think he went to college, and he ran these big businesses. Jack Milne was a very just amazing business guy and genius mind. So Jack and Harry went to the Whiteman Stadium, and Jack was watching the Speedway in 1968, and he's like, you know, Harry, I like this Speedway. You know, I was once a 1937 world champion, and I like it, but the Whiteman Stadium, it's not quite right for Speedway because the Whiteman is in Pacoima, which is, sorry, close your ears, Steve Evans. I won't talk to you right now. The Whiteman Stadium is kind of far away, you know, from like the city, and it didn't draw that many people, so the fan base wasn't that great. And also the people sat really far back from the track because it just wasn't set up to be close. And some of the areas didn't have a crash wall like in the front. So the fans had to sit back really far so they didn't get killed. If a rider went off the track, maybe he would like run somebody over. So they had to actually move the stands back a little bit further on the straightaway at the Whiteman Stadium in 68. So the fans didn't get hurt. Safety is very important, right? We don't want anyone dying or little children. You know, I could see Gene Woods getting a program or playing around, and then one of those Speedway bikes, you know, come after him. So he was probably one of those little kids running around at that time. And so we had to move those. They had to move those seats way far back. And so Jack turned to Harry and said, you know, we could start a Speedway track. We should start one where there's more people, and so that the fans can like be on top of the Speedway action, so that it's not so far away like Whiteman Stadium. So they were inspired by the Whiteman Stadium. They took the things that were good, and they thought of the things that were not good, and they decided they were going to go ahead and look for a Speedway track so that they could implement the good into a new track in 1969. And that's where they found the Costa Mesa Fairgrounds. They went ahead and contacted the board and Costa Mesa, and they were able to get approval. And Jack had this business where he built the stands, and they went ahead and built like 2,000 stands. So they said, oh my gosh, that's too many. And then as Costa Mesa grew, they had to keep building more and more stands. Jack Milne had his welding machine out and made lots of stands. Today, there's over 6,500 seats at the Costa Mesa Bull Ring. And it started off with Jack Milne and Harry Oxley with only 2,000 seats. But so many people came, they had to keep building. But we're going to talk about that next time, not now. That's the next show. Maybe we'll talk about the beginning of Costa Mesa Speedway in 1969. But today, we're talking 1968. But they went ahead, Harry and Jack Milne, and they went ahead and saw how cool Speedway is, and they were inspired to do the Costa Mesa Speedway at the fairgrounds. So that's exactly what they did. They went ahead and they started the Speedway. And so it was really good. The Speedway was just amazing. Actually, what happened was there was an incident here that changed the Speedway forever. There was a promotional race. We don't want to forget that. That's a real big part of Speedway history. One of the biggest parts of Speedway history is this coming up right now. It's very, very big. And I guess dude Criswall saw that these riders were all riding like flat track TT style, like with their butts on their seat. They weren't riding properly the Speedway style, but you can't blame them because that's all they knew. They come from the TT world of flat track, and they were riding Speedway like flat trackers. And dude Criswall got this guy back in 1968, and he was a pretty good rider. I guess he was a world champion named Ivan the Great Major. Do you know Ivan Major? He was the king of Speedway, and he was a six-time world champion. And right after he won the world championship, dude went ahead and somehow got Ivan the Great Major to come to Whiteman Stadium to teach the boys how to ride Speedway. And so dude actually somehow got this guy, this living legend named Ivan Major. Ivan just was sensational. There he is winning his world championship just before he went to the Whiteman Stadium. We like Ivan Major because Ivan Major, he just dedicated his whole life to Speedway. He promoted after he raced. He raced for like 20 years or so or more. And Ivan Majors, who won those 6 world championships, Ivan Majors goes down by the Speedway Star as the greatest rider ever to ride a Speedway bike. The greatest ever of all times is this guy. This guy right here, Ivan Major. He was sensational. Ivan didn't like to lose. He won like almost every race. I think when Ivan got a little old, like in the 70s, he started to slow down, maybe in the mid 70s, because he was like really old. But during Ivan's prime, he was unbeatable. I mean, Ivan was the master of all masters. Ivan Major. They brought him to the Whiteman Stadium, and they wanted to teach the guys how to ride Speedway. And here's Ivan with Sonny Nutter. Sliding Sonny Nutter. Do you know Sliding Sonny Nutter? And actually, Ivan, he brought his handlebars and a few other parts from England. He flew, I guess, on the airplane. And all the American boys weren't very impressed. We had Greg Hazard on the show, and he was telling me that I guess the guys just didn't like think Ivan Major was anything special. And then there was one of the managers talking to Ivan Major. I think that's Sonny Nutter's manager. They helped Ivan Major when they got here, and Ivan Major actually didn't have the respect from the American riders. So the American riders maybe were a little jealous of Ivan Major, or they didn't like him, or something like that. I'm not sure the whole story, but I guess in Speedway you have to earn your respect. And I guess Ivan didn't really, go over too well with the Speedway riders of that day. If you look at Sonny Nutter's face over there, he's got his hands crossed. That's kind of a position, a negative position. I studied that in college, and his face is not really good. Sonny, what happened to you? And so a lot of these riders, probably including Sonny Nutter, had like no respect for or low respect for Ivan Major. Maybe they're jealous. They thought, what's going on? And Ivan, he went ahead and they gave him an old JAP, Fairchild JAP. Ivan was mad. In this picture, Ivan was like yelling, like, I don't want to ride this. I want an ISO Jawa, because Ivan won his world championships that's when the Jawas were coming out, and they were pretty good. They were taking over the JPs at the time, and the guy said, no, all we have is JAPs here. You must ride a JAP, Ivan, or you have to go home. Ivan was pissed off here. His head was down. He was like yelling, probably cussing his head off. He was mad because he thought that the Americans were going to provide him with a nice speedway bike and stuff. And then they provided him with a 1934 Jerry Fairchild JAP, and he was a little pissed off. So Ivan put his handlebars on and his parts from England. He wasn't real happy. And then he went out to show the American boys how to ride speedway. So Ivan got out there at the starting line, and all the riders were like Sonny Nutter there with their hands crossed, thinking, oh, this guy's a joke. Because the Americans, they thought that they were the fastest guys on two wheels. And they couldn't believe that you could go faster on a speedway bike, because these guys were all really good TT riders. They were famous, they were quality, fast riders. So what else could go wrong? I mean, these guys were the best. So they didn't have a lot of respect for this European guy named Ivan Major he's from New Zealand. And they just didn't really think he was anything special. Then Ivan, he gets out on the speedway track, and he was pretty good. Ivan Major was good. When Ivan got on the speedway track, he got at the starting line, with his bike. He's on that old JP. He was pissed off. I think Ivan Major was so mad. And then he looked over at the Americans, and the Americans were like laughing at him, holding their hands like this. You're not any good. I'm Sonny Nutter, And all these riders, were watching. He was the big show. He made this program thing here. He was on the program. I mean, the big hoopla for Ivan Major. I mean, he was the star of this night. And Ivan Major, they had him at the starting gate with the tapes, I guess it was. And then when the tapes went up, Ivan just let the throttle go. And Ivan Major, in true Ivan Major form, he had that throttle wide open. Ivan Major, that old JP of Fairchild. And he never let go of the throttle. It was full throttle around the whole track. I think he did like 4 laps. And the American riders were like blown away. They're like, oh my God. They never saw a speedway bike go so fast. So these Americans, in perfect American style, they thought they were the best. But I guess the master, Ivan Major, came and he showed these guys like who was the best. And it was Ivan the Great Major. He came and he showed the Yankees how to ride speedway. They didn't know how to ride. And these guys were all like freaking out, like Mike Bass was there, Steve Bass, all the speedway riders. And they actually just took lessons from Ivan Major. They actually got schooled how to ride speedway. And that was actually the turning point in American speedway history, is when Ivan Major came to the Whiteman Stadium. And he came to Costa Mesa too later and kept teaching and tutoring the American boys how to ride speedway. And that changed everything. After Ivan left, the Americans started changing their style. They started riding like standing up a little bit more, and they started like learning how to ride speedway the proper way. So the speedway actually changed the minute Ivan Major came in American history. That's very, very big. And the riders, like I say, they would start standing up riding, and they were riding their speedway bikes a little bit different. They stopped riding sitting down on their butts. They got up a little bit more, and they start sliding the bike properly. And then Mike Bass was also learned how to ride that bike, and he was standing up, learning how to ride a speedway bike properly. And all the riders, they started riding like the speedway bike. They start standing up. There's a picture of Greg Hazarat and Steve Bass, I believe, in the back there. And they're just riding the speedway bikes. They learned from the master, Ivan Major, how to ride a speedway bike. They didn't know, but they thought that they knew how to ride a speedway bike. And they were just oh my gosh, they were just riding kind of more standing up nowadays. No more sitting down. If you see the pictures of these guys sitting down, they never sat down again after this particular lesson from Ivan the Great Major. And so that's kind of how we had it. And Speedway changed forever. That was just the big, big change of Speedway. The whole style, everything changed, and everyone realized how bad they kind of were next to Ivan Major. And they got humbled. These proud Americans, these proud Yankees, they got schooled by the master, Ivan Major. We love Ivan Major. And Barry Briggs came later, and Ivan and Barry were schooling the Speedway riders and teaching them, and they became really, really good. So that's exactly what happened. And we have this guy here. His name is Rick Woods. He is the legend of Speedway, and he was the first United States Speedway champion back in 1968. The Rocket, Rick Woods, was the first American Speedway champion in the modern era. And Rick Woods just was an amazing rider. He's a handsome fella, and he just was a really good. He was famous a little bit before. He was one of the senior riders, and he just came into the Speedway like Sonny Nutter and Bill Cody. He came in with some experience riding, and he won the first United States Speedway Championship at the Whiteman Stadium in 1968. Rick Woods was the Rocket, and he went ahead and he was the first champion in the modern era. And Rick Woods just was a legend. And rest in peace, Rick Woods. And we appreciate your brother, Gene Woods. He's a really great guy, and he's done really good for Speedway. And we have a picture of his brother, Gene, here somewhere. If we can find him. Let's see if we can find Gene. We have a young Gene Woods here riding mini bikes somewhere over the rainbow. I don't know where he is. Where are you, Gene? You got lost from us. And we have a picture here of Gene. I don't know where Gene went to. Poor guy. He left somewhere. But Gene was a young racer here. This is Gene, if you can see it. Gene was a good rider, and we'll take Rick off, if we can take Rick off. And Gene was hopefully we get Gene on there. I think we got Gene. We got Gene on there. Gene Woods, where are you? Gene Woods was a young guy back in 1968, but he had a brother that was kind of famous. He won the first United States Speedway Championship. And when your brother wins the first United States Speedway Championship, everybody knows who you are. So Gene Woods, he learned to ride mini bikes back in that era of 68, and he started racing and became a factory rider for all these different junior mini speedway bikes. And he rode a junior speedway bike. Ed Schaefer built him his first junior speedway bike. And Gene Woods just became really famous because of his brother, Rick Woods. Lucky guy. I wish I was Gene Woods, having all that fame at a young age because of your famous brother. And Gene Woods turned out to be an amazing rider. He was his own man. He rode his own style. He was totally different than Rick Woods in every way. And Gene Woods turned out to continue to involve with Speedway with his Steel Shoe Hall of Fame. And he's doing the On Any Sunday 50-year anniversary coming up in a couple months. So Gene Woods is really an amazing guy. He loves Speedway to this day. And we really appreciate these kind of people like Gene Woods to the sport of Speedway. So they're very much appreciated to this day. And Gene Woods was a good little rider when he was a young kid. So we really appreciate all that Gene Woods did. And we're gonna show the Shorty video. If you didn't see Shorty Campbell, this was Shorty Campbell back April in 1921. This was one of the earliest Speedway races. It was the wood board racing they actually spent like $100,000 and they built this wood track. It's all made out of plywood, and then they put the dirt on top of it, and then they water it like a speedway track, and the termites would come on the wood. And but this is what they did, and this was in Los Angeles, California. This was and short and Shrimp was going 102 miles an hour on a speedway bike in 1921. He set the record for track. This was one of the record of tracks in 1921. And
there's Shrimp Burns. Remember, we talked about him. This was one of those wood track race that we talked about in the 1910s and 1920s in one of our last shows. And Shrimp Burns is a good rider. He went ahead and won that race. But these were the tracks. They made it out of wood, and they wrought it with the termites. They only lasted like 10 years. It cost $100,000 to build these particular racetracks. And Shrimp getting the win. Yeah, Shrimp. Congratulations, Shrimp. That guy was an awesome rider. There he is. There's a little Shrimpy. I guess he was small.
In those old days, they used to, like, if you were tall, you were called Sprouts Elder, and if you were small, they'd call you Shorty or Shrimpy. They were nasty in those days. And Shrimp was fast. That guy was really fast. He went 102 miles an hour on an Indian motorcycle before the JEPs. The JEPs were mass produced in 1927 or 28. And this was 1921 in Los Angeles, California. 102 miles an hour on an Indian.
This guy Shrimp was really fast. He was actually going 102 miles per hour. There it is, 102 miles an hour, Shrimp Burns. And he crossed the finish line on the Indian motorcycle before the JEP World's Record falls. This guy was fast. There's Shrimpy right there on an Indian motor.
Well, he went 102 miles an hour on that Indian. It's very fast. And so all that stuff was the history coming to 1968 at the Whiteman Stadium. Early day. And so the Shrimp guy was really good. You know, I thought it was just a funny name or something, but the guy went over 102 miles an hour on a speedway bike. Actually, it was an Indian bike before JEPs. And that was just really cool, you know, that they just went ahead and raced at that fast. And actually, going back to Dude Criswall, the guy who promoted the speedway race in 1968 at the Whiteman Stadium, they actually had a race over in Mexico, I heard, and Dude promoted that race. It was in Mexico in 1968. This was the Whiteman Stadium in 68, and he went ahead and he promoted Mexico. He went down to Tijuana, Mexico, and they had this speedway race down in Mexico at the same time that Dude went ahead and did the Whiteman Stadium. And all the riders went to Tijuana. Tijuana is kind of a bad place, you know. I've been there a few times. It's kind of a little scary. And Dude Criswall, he promoted a speedway race in Tijuana, Mexico, over the border of San Diego. And I guess he paid the riders a few bucks, like $50 or something. And they had this race around like a high school track or something like that. And they had these stands, and there was nobody in the stands. And there was very few people in the stands. And then there was like a little river or something by the speedway track. It was kind of dangerous. I think if you crash, you'd go into a river or you'd die. So it was a little dangerous speedway. Dude put on a very dangerous race. And then over the river, there's like a hill. And the hill was full of like thousands of people for free. They watching the speedway, but in the stands, like nobody went into nobody paid to go in Mexico. They all went for free and watched from the hill. So they were smart. You know, the Mexican people, they did a good job in saving money. But Dude went ahead, and I guess it didn't make any money, and Dude felt kind of bad. And then after the races were over, I guess Dude wasn't paying the riders their money or something. I guess he pocketed a lot of the money, and he was trying to take off. And then I think his car broke or something in Mexico, and so all the riders, like maybe Sonny Nutter and a few of these riders, were helping Dude start his car, but they didn't realize Dude was running away with all their money. So they started Dude's car, I guess, and then Dude drove away. And then when Dude drove away, all those speedway riders like, "Where's our money? Where's our money?" And Dude's like, "See you later." So Dude was a little bit of a shark, like he brought these guys to Mexico, and I think he didn't pay them at all or much money, and he left, and they helped him start his car, and Dude took off with all the money. There wasn't that much, I think. It wasn't really a big event, but that was kind of a funny story about Dude Criswall. And, he just was kind of he has a name of being a little bit shady, but he introduced the modern era of Speedway, so we have to give credit where credit is due. And he did a great job in bringing Speedway back to the United States in 1968. So 68 was really the year of the revival of Speedway. Actually, Costa Mesa was kind of the revival, but the real revival was in 1968, where Rick Woods won that first United States Speedway Championship in the modern era. And then Speedway, start taking off at Costa Mesa after that. And they started having races at the Trojan Speedway at that time. I think it's Southgate and in Los Angeles, like Flat Track or something like that in Speedway. And then the Trojan lasted from I think it came in 68 also, or 69 and 70. And it lasted a couple years. El Toro Speedway faded away. And so that was just kind of, I guess it was because of the development. The houses in El Toro are very expensive in Orange County. So it went away. And then Whiteman Stadium only lasted like 1 year or so. And I guess Dude went bankrupt. I guess he took all their money from Mexico and like left. Goodbye. So Dude kind of went off into the sunset. And he was a motorcycle racer, and I thought he was an interesting character for sure. And we have to pay some respect to Dude Criswall for bringing the Speedway back. But that's how the early day Speedway started at the Whiteman Stadium in Pacoima, at that airport hangar, and it's in the middle of nowhere, about 10 minutes from where Bass used to live when he was a little child. And it was just a really great venue. And then the Speedway, like I say, lasted 1 year at Whiteman, and then Costa Mesa came, and we're going to talk about that next time. Costa Mesa really changed Speedway big time. But the introduction of Speedway really came at the Whiteman Stadium and in 1968. And like I say, Dude was a real big part of that because nobody really thought about that. And also Fairchild, he brought all those Speedway bikes to introduce Speedway back to America. All those old, when I was a young rider, like 17 years old, I used to work in Fairchild's his shop in Pasadena, California, where the Milnes were and Lammy lived. I used to go there every day to Pasadena and work on my Speedway bike. And Jerry would help me, do all my work, my engine work. The bike was pretty fast. And I used to look over because I used to do all the cleaning and work. Jerry didn't do any of that. I did all the dirty work, and Jerry did all the smart work, fixing the engine. And I looked over one day, I was working on my Speedway bike, and then there was these old JAPs. They look like 1930s or something. And I said, Jerry, like, what is this bike? And then Jerry was like, well, those are the old JAPs we took over to Whiteman Stadium in 1968. And I go, what? I didn't know what he's talking about because I was a young 17-year-old kid. And, when you're 17, you don't care about Speedway history. And all you're thinking about is racing. And then Jerry, like I said, he took me over to Milne Brothers Motorcycle Shop. It was a beautiful shop with a neon sign that said Milne Brothers. And we went in and sat on the 37 World Championship bike. And he's selling these brand new JAP bikes, probably the last JAP bikes made with the orange fenders. And I think they had Hagen frames, which are good. Hagen, I rode a Hagen frame, and those were really fantastic. I think Hagen's still producing quality frames today, and Hagen was building those quality frames back in the day. And I rode, my first bike was a Hagen JAP, and it was amazing. So we really liked the Hagen, and they had the Hagen frames in the Milne Brothers shop. It's just an amazing, place to go visit. Jerry took me there, probably thinking one day Brian's going to have a show. And he's going to tell everybody about the Milne Brothers shop. And I wasn't very impressed at the time because I didn't really care. I mean, that much. I was just a speedway rider, a teenager, 17. But I got to witness a part of that history before it left. And that was really amazing. It's really neat. I can talk about it now because I never knew what it was. It didn't mean that much to me at that time, but now I cherish that moment, looking back at it. And then also Jerry, he had that 1945 lay down Speedway bike in his shop, and it was parked right next to me all the time. And I'd see this weird looking Speedway bike, a lay down JAP. It was weird. I didn't bring the picture today, but I said to Jerry, what is this thing? This thing looks crazy. And he said, it's a lay down JAP, Brian. I said, that thing, does it work? And he goes, it's the wave of the future. All the Speedway bikes are going to be lay downs. And I made the first one. And I said, Jerry, I don't think this bike's going to work, the lay down. And he goes, oh, yes, Brian, you don't know what you're talking about. And I didn't know. I didn't know what I was talking about. 17 years old, okay, give me a break. And I said, how does that thing work? And then Jerry says, well, the piston, the lay down bike that is like this. And then when the piston goes back and forth, it propels the bike forward, faster, like a rocket ship. And it goes back, but it pushes the bike forward as the lay down, the piston, the way it works in the cylinder. And I really didn't know what he's talking about. I didn't know what he's talking about. And so anyways, so what happened? Today all the Speedway bikes are what? Lay down Speedway bikes, and they're fast as lightning. So Jerry Fairchild really was the inventor of the modern day lay down Speedway bike. He had the first ones, and he had a lay down Jawa too. He had a lay down Jap and a lay down Jawa. It's just amazing what that guy knew. He knew all this stuff in his head. He was 50 years ahead of his time, and he was my mechanic. I thought the guy was good. I mean, I always respected Jerry because I knew he was kind of old at the time, and he was so smart. He would open up my engine and start working on it, and he would do it so fast. Jerry knew the inside of a JP so well. He could do it with his eyes blindfolded. I mean, he was good. And I didn't really know anything about engines, and I still don't to this day. I always take my bikes to a mechanic and I say, fix it, because I like to ride. I don't like to fix bikes. But Jerry was really smart, and he was really good. He did that first laydown JP, which ended up going to the Roshios because he built that for Ernie Roshio, who had passed away in 1952 at West Ham Stadium. And when I was riding, there was another young, little bit older rider, Ernie Roshio, the nephew of the one who died. And we became best friends, Ernie and I, his brother's son, and Ernie's brother's son. And he went ahead and he got that laydown, that old laydown Speedway bike. It was a blue one. And we used to go out practicing at the Lake Elsinore. Do you know the Lake Elsinore Speedway? It's old, and it was fun. It was like the size of Costa Mesa, and it was a fun track. We used to burn hot laps every Saturday and Sunday. We'd go there riding at the Lake Paris Speedway off the 15 freeway. Back in the old days, we used to have to take the main street, because I came from Orange County. I lived in Orange. And then we take the 91 freeway all the way to Main Street in Corona. And then we turn off of Main Street by the Del Taco. Do you know the Del Taco off of Main Street in Corona, off of Main Street? And then we turn right at the Del Taco, And then we go like another 50 miles to Lake Elsinore. We take all these like side roads, and it was like took forever to get to Lake Elsinore. And now they have the I-15 freeway, which is a little past the main street, and then it takes you all the way to Lake Elsinore, going about 80 miles an hour. But back in the old days, when we used to practice at Lake Elsinore, we used to have to get off at Main Street and go do and ride slow boat all the way to Lake Elsinore. It was a long ride, but it was okay because we were riding Speedway, so that was fun. And we rode, and then that bike, that lay down bike, my friend Ernie Rocio, he was riding the thing, and Ernie wasn't really that good of a rider. He was like 28 years old. He was kind of an old man at the time. I was like 17, so anyone 10 years older than me was very, very old. I was very stupid too. But Ernie didn't ride that bike that good, a little bit good. And so Ernie went ahead and he rode that thing, and it went over the hill at the Lake Elsinore, and it went into like dropped over like a 3 or 4 meter hole. And then we go running out to Ernie like, hey, Ernie, what happened? And he's like, my collarbone's broken. He went over the hill on that lay down JP that Fairchild built. He fly down the hill, and he was handicapped. He broke his collarbone. We pulled the JP, the lay down, put it in my van, and we took him to the hospital for his X-rays. And later, Ernie let me ride that JP, and I didn't like it. That bike was made like in 1945, and it just was not really good for me. I tried riding that thing, and it rode like a piece of crap. But Jerry had the right technology with the engine and everything. The setup was a little wrong for me because I was a D1 rider at the time, kind of almost a D1 rider, and it just wasn't like, if I was riding that in a D1 race, that would be pretty sad, because I would get killed. But I had a JP also, and it was an upright, a long stroke, and it was really fast with a Hagen frame. It was a good setup. But that 1945 setup of the laydown wasn't quite right, for the modern era. But Jerry had the ingenuity to do that laydown. So that was a lot of fun. And we went ahead and had some good times back in that time. And then, like I say, the 68 season came to an end. Rick Woods won it. And we're going to start the next show, what happens after that. It's really cool. So thank you so much for watching the 1968 story about the revival of modern day Speedway. It was an amazing time. It was historic time. And Ivan Major taught everyone how to ride a Speedway bike. Those damn Yanks were proud. They thought they knew everything, but they didn't really know everything. They needed to be taught by the master, and they were taught by Ivan the Great Major. He was the master of all time. The greatest rider ever to ride a Speedway bike is who? Ivan Major. Don't you forget that. If you think Ivan Major wasn't the greatest, you tell me, and I'll talk to you about that. Ivan was sensational, the master of all time. So that was it for the 1968 Speedway season. It was an amazing time. Good things happened. It was kind of a magical time in Speedway. All those flat trackers came to start riding Speedway. Some of the flat trackers went back to flat track. They didn't really like it when Ivan told them to change their style. To get off the seat, ride up high, get your balls up near the oil tank, ride that bike, ride it. Some of the flat trackers didn't make it. They said, oh, God, we're going to forget this. And they went back to the flat track days, and they were riding the flat track. But some of these riders, like Bill Cody, the Bass Brothers, Woods, all the legends, Sonny Nutter, they adapted that style that Ivan taught, and they got rid of those bad habits, and they became stars in the 1969 and the 70s. So we're going to talk about that. That was a fun time. And it was a time where it was really great. I have a blog on the fun times of the 70s, and Speedway was fun. I may have to show you a little bit of that clip in the next show. That was a good time. But thank you so much for watching the show today. The 1968 Speedway revival of the modern day Speedway. It was a good time, and it was historic. Speedway began, and it's been going on for like over 50 years now since that time. And we've had some really good moments and maybe some not so good moments, but we're going to remember the good moments for sure. So thank you so much for watching the revival of Speedway. And we're going to talk to you next time about the show, about what's going to happen in 1969, the beginning of Costa Mesa Fairgrounds. Those were exciting days. Those were the glory days of Speedway. And they're really a lot of fun to talk about. So we're going to talk about that next. But thank you so much. Enjoy your day, you guys. I appreciate you guys watching the show. It really means a lot. We're having lots of fun doing it. And hopefully we can teach you a little bit about Speedway, about the history of the modern day Speedway. I like that because I want to preserve this history. It means a lot to me to share that. And also so people can enjoy the history of Speedway. So thank you so much. We're going to go riding right now. We're going to get on the motorcycle. We're going to go riding. So have a great one. Stay on two wheels. Enjoy your day, you guys. Get a good night's sleep if you're in U.S. And we'll look forward to seeing you next show. Thank you so much. Take care.